Good morning and welcome to Thank Dog We Made It. Today I'm going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into the problems that I was troubleshooting last week with somebody's photographs that they sent in to me with a onesie pattern that they've been working on. And the problem with it is that it's too tight at the front and it's gaping in behind the front legs. So let me take a look at the photographs just to show you again what it is that we're looking at and how we're dealing with this problem. So the photographs that she sent me, let me just pull them up here. She sent a number of photographs that show where the problems are. So if you look at this area here on the dog, you can see she's pointing out to, she feels it's too tight here at the front of the legs, and that's in the chest area. And then it's also gaping in behind the front legs here, and that's in the chest circumference area, and it also has to do with the front leg area. So that was one of the problems that she pointed out. The other issue that I could see when she sent these to me is that the jacket is laying far too far down the back. Normally you would want a coat for full coverage. You'd want to have it coming up around the collar area here somewhere and not pulled so far back as that. So we want to look at why there's this big gap here on the back of the dog. And then if we look at the side view here, the full side view, we could also look at the length the length on the dog and how we might pull that down further. But we're also just looking here as we can see there's a few issues going on. It's too tight at the front, as she pointed out. We have the gaping back here that I pointed out, and it's not as obvious on the side here, but you can see there's a bit of a gap between where the coat ends and where the dog's collar is here. And then maybe if I zoom in on that a little bit, you could see that a little better. So the coat ends here and the collar ends there. So that's a bit of a gap while the dog is standing. But when it's sitting, which I think is what we're seeing here, when it sits, it even pulls that further back along the dog's back, further back along the dog's back. Yeah. So we can see all those issues here. And then lastly, I'll just show you another photo of the dog sitting down. So we can see that it's harder to tell here where the tightness that she was talking about is going on in the front legs, but we can see the gap in behind the legs. It's wrinkling kind of here. So it's not really truly fitting around the arms. And you can see this gap between where the collar sits and where the dog coat sits. So this is the pattern that she sent me. The photograph was cut off at the edge here, but this is kind of what I'm assuming how the pattern would continue on. And this portion here joins up with this portion here. And so what I wanted to do today was just, I kind of touched on this last week where I talked about how I thought we might deal with some of these issues. So what I'll do again is I'll show you this flow chart here where the different problems, this is an area like you could look at each of these different problems on your dog. So what I always suggest first is you're going to measure your dog and then you're going to look at the pattern and say, okay, well, as I can see when I've made this coat, it's way too tight at the chest. So then you look at some of the problems that could be going on. And it's saying here, like the front leg openings are too tight. Well, that is potentially a problem, right? It's too tight in the front. So if that's the case, you say, yes, that is the case for me. Then I'm going to zoom this in a little bit. So if you say, yes, it's too tight in the front leg openings, then you say F3. And you look down here in these little blue bubbles, and F3 means that the withers are too far forward. If you look at F5, which is the other possible solution, is F5 says chest circumference is too tight. So what I would do first, if that's one of the first problems that I see happening, I would look at the withers measurement. So I would take the withers measurement on my dog and then I would compare that at the pattern level. So I'm going to show you how I'm going to do that in a minute, or how I would go about doing that in a minute. And then the other option is, as I said, the chest circumference is too tight. So that could be happening, and when I'm talking about the chest circumference, that is in behind the front legs. So if that's too tight there and everything else is kind of loose, then it could be creating these other problem areas. And then if we look at the other point where it's gaping at the neck, you know how it was pulling way far back at the neck, it's gaping on the back side of the neck. So if we looked at that, if the neck opening is too wide, if we say yes, then we come down through this chart. Now we're looking at a panel style chart. That's what I've broken this type of pattern that she's working on. We're looking at a panel style chart. So, or panel style pattern, I should say. So if we look at that chart, F2, it says the neck circumference is too loose. That's a possibility. And also F10. So if I scroll this over, how am I going to scroll this over? Whoops, whoops, whoops. What did I do? Hit the wrong button, clearly. There we go. If I, oh dear, hitting wrong buttons here, but I wanted to look at F10. Chest width is too wide. So these are some troubleshooting things. What I thought I would do here is go over to the overhead projector and show you at the level of the pattern. I want to just show you this pattern so that you can see where some of these troubleshooting things might occur and how you can look at them. So this is not exactly her pattern. Her pattern is quite literally all one type, one piece of fabric and one piece of pattern. But if you did a cut down the middle of her pattern piece, like if you went straight down the middle underneath the arms, you would be able to divide it into two pieces, which I've done here. But her pattern looks kind of like this, if you recall it. So it's pretty much exactly the same as her pattern. Now I just mocked this up really quickly. It's not all to scale. It doesn't measure, it doesn't match my measurements chart, but it'll give you a really good rough idea here of where I would look at the measurements on my dog and how to compare that to the measurements on the pattern itself. So what I want to look at here is, first of all, this is my withers line. Now I just want to, let's just take out the handy dandy dog here, which I love to bring out to show you exactly how we come up with this. So if you're measuring your dog, you're going to take an invisible line and go up straight from behind their front legs up to where their spine is, and then measure the distance from the collar, where your collar or the neck area on your dog, where that collar would normally sit, and run it down to that invisible line behind your dog's front legs. So if I measure that, it comes to 3.5 inches, more or less. So if you take that to the pattern level and you measure down on the pattern for 3.5 inches, that works out perfectly for my pattern, but I'm not trying to show you a perfect fit. Let's pretend that that measurement that I just took on my dog was 4 or 4.5 inches. We're looking at a bigger dog, pretend. So what I would need to do, if that withers length from the collar to the withers on the dog that I just showed you on that stuffed dog, if that length is different than this length here, between where the pattern starts and where my withers line is on the pattern, then I would need to increase that distance. And not all patterns are going to show you where that withers line is, but it's always super easy for you to find. What you're going to do is you're going to look for the point on the pattern where the pattern runs in behind the front legs. So if you imagine, let's see if I can even put this on a dog. If you imagine this coat on the dog, it would sit something like this, right? And this portion here would be wrapping around behind that front leg. So again, when we did that measurement, we ran straight up from behind that front leg, and that's where the withers are. So again, if you're looking at your pattern and it doesn't have a nice little line showing you where the withers are, just look for that point where it wraps behind the front legs on the dog, and that's where your withers line is. So as I said, let's pretend that that withers is wrong and that we wanted to make it, let's say we wanted to make that 4 inches instead of 3.5. So all I would do is I would cut this straight along this line and I would add some space in there and move that up so that I had a longer withers point. And when you do anything to the back, you also need to do that to the front, because this arm scythe area, this circular area here, has to match up from the front and the back. So you would also find the same place on the pattern where the withers is on the front, which is the same thing. You're going to take it from that point where it wraps around the front legs and just draw that along, and then you would add that same distance. Whenever you make a change to the back, if you're doing something that directly attaches to the front, you've got to make the same change on this side too. And then that's pretty much it for the withers. But that may not be your problem. It may be like I just showed you on this dog. I measured the withers here, I measured the dog, and they were both actually the same size. So then we say, okay, well, that's fine. We ruled out that problem. That is not the reason why this coat is kind of gaping. So the next option could be that the neck circumference is too big. That was one of the thoughts, right? I think I showed that on that flow chart, that the neck circumference might be too big. So what you could do is you would measure, if I take my measuring tape here, I would measure this portion here, which is around 4, and then I would also measure this, which is around 3. So that gives me a neck circumference of 7, but of course, because both of these are on the fold, I would double that. So that would turn out to be a neck circumference of 14. Now, if I measure my dog and I say, okay, well, that's actually, it's gaping was one of the things that we looked at. It was gaping around that back. I would probably then want to, I would look at the dog's measurement in this, in this pretend situation, we're going to say that we actually need to decrease that measurement. So then you would look at decreasing the measurement around the neck circumference. And you would simply do that by shortening this level here. You would cut it off here and you would cut it off here. So that is how I would deal with the neck circumference if it was gaping around the neck from that problem. Another area that you could have is that the chest area is too narrow or too wide. So again, I would take my dog's chest measurement. So the front chest measurement is, if you're looking at my measurement chart, let's pull this out here. I'll bring this up a little closer. I have 10 different measurements. It says 11, but I guess it is 11. The front chest width, number 10 and number 11 are the chest width areas on the dog. This is not to be confused with the chest circumference, which is number 4 on my chart. The chest circumference happens behind the front legs on the dog. This is the chest circumference area here. But the chest width is this portion here. And it's from the sides of the dog's front legs. That's where the chest is on the dog. So I would measure this and get a sense that's about 4.5, give or take. And I would look at the widest point on my pattern and measure that against what my dog's measurement is. So in this particular case, my dog measures 4.5, I said. This measures, let's say 3.25, but if I doubled that, because this would be both sides of that front portion, if I doubled that, we would be looking at 6.5, which is way bigger than my skinny little dog's front chest. So I would be looking at decreasing this section here. The other measurement on my chart is this section right here, number 11, which is the inner chest. And if the inner chest measurement is this little tiny area in between here. So of course, we're looking at a stuffed dog. It's got a very, very tiny little section in there. Yours would likely be very different, but this is 2 inches, it says. On the pattern, where I would be looking at that is in this section here, in the thinnest portion of this section that runs between the front legs on the dog. So my dog has a 2 inch, but this is half, right? So we would actually be looking at 4 inches, which is wider than this. So this, obviously, if this was my dog, I would be, or if I was looking at this pattern, I would be cutting this off here. I would cut down the pattern here, and I would make this much skinnier. This would not go as wide as it is. So that's one of the things that you could look at is the chest. This is the chest width. And then another area that could be a problem on your dog might be the chest circumference. So if I had mentioned this when we were looking at the flow chart, if the chest circumference is too tight, it may be holding the dog coat in a spot here, but it's making everything else not fit right up in the chest area because it's holding the coat in an unnatural spot. So you may need to be looking at what the chest circumference is on your dog. So you'd run that around, and this dog has a very flat belly, but normally in a dog, you're going to find they have a wider section of their chest. So when you do their chest circumference, you're going to try to find that widest point on their chest and then run the measurement tape around there. And one little trick, when I do my measurements, things like circumference around the chest and around the neck, I always put a couple of fingers between the dog and the measuring tape, because that just gives it a little bit of flexibility. You don't want to have it so tight to the dog that when you actually mate that coat, it's just stuck right to their body. Giving it a couple of fingers underneath just gives you a little bit of flexibility in that measurement. So if your measurement, you measure your dog around that widest point in their chest, and it turns out to be different than your pattern, then you'd know you could adjust the pattern. So where you look at that on a panel pattern such as this, your chest circumference is going to be from here all the way over to there. So you're going to look at that widest point, which is typically kind of right around where the bottom of the front section ends. And you'd measure across from there. Now, these would actually overlap because I've got my seam allowance on there. So you'd measure from there to there, and that's 9 3/4 more or less on my measuring here. So if I was to do this as a dog coat for this lovely little stuffed dog here, it would be way too big around that chest circumference, because as I measured it, it was 15. But 15 divided in half is only 7.5. And so I would actually be looking at over down to here, like this portion here, instead of 9.5 or 9 3/4. So I would need to cut this pattern down in order to fit around the chest properly. And the easiest way to do that would be to cut it here and here. Now there are some far more precise methods of cutting and adjusting the pattern so that it fits. Because when you do one change, it changes a lot of different areas. When you're talking about in the width area, the circumference or the width, when you make one change, it changes many other portions of the fit. So if you imagine that I decided to cut it off here, it affects the arm scythe, this opening on the arm, which means by just doing that, I'm going to start making it too tight in here. So there are some ways that you can do these adjustments where it affects one portion of the pattern, but not another portion of the pattern. But I can't get into that right now. That's just a little too finite detail. It's a lot of cutting, spreading, and angling the pattern out into different ways. So I don't want to get into doing that. You can find out all of this stuff if you are really interested in dialing in the pattern to try to figure out how to get it to just really beautifully fit your dog. I've got the custom fit toolkit, which walks you through all of these things in really great detail. It shows you how to do it at a really simple, kind of a quick fit method, which really will dial in how to measure that and how to fix that pattern. Or if you're really got a challenging dog that you just like, let's say a French bulldog that has like a super wide chest and a skinny little, like a wide chest width across that chest, as I was saying, on this measurement number 10. A lot of the French bulldogs will have a very wide chest, and they'll also have a really wide inner chest. They also have skinny little legs, and then they have quite a narrow little the chest circumference, that measurement in behind the front legs. They're quite narrow around there compared to this chest area across here. So if you had a dog like that where you were really having a challenge making patterns fit, then I would definitely suggest the Custom Fit Toolkit, and where you can start to really dive into how to customize that pattern in various sections without affecting the overall fit of the pattern. The one last thing that I wanted to talk about when we looked at that on those photographs of the dog coat was kind of short on that dog. So what you can do here is you can increase the length of that dog coat. And whenever I talk about lengthening things, I always suggest that you try to find the point on the pattern where there is no curve. You try to find the point on the pattern where it is, you've got two fairly straight lines. You can always cut it anywhere on an angle as well. There's no reason why you can't do that. But when you cut on an angle and then you add some more space in there, you've got to true up that line again, that seam line, because that really does change the line quite significantly. If you can make your cut for the length at a point when the lines are fairly straight on either side, then you're much, much better off. So if I was to try to lengthen that coat, I would do a cut right here below where that, right at the point where this straight line starts to curve and go into the back end. I would cut straight across there, and then I would add some extra length in here. If I was to do that, I would also want to measure the front height on the dog. And the front height on the dog goes from where the collar normally sits on the dog, which would be right about here, goes through the front legs, and then it ends at the widest point of your dog's chest. So let's say this is the widest point on my cute little stuffy here. I would measure that distance, and then I would measure that against here. And if this was not long enough or it was too long, then I could alter that length here as well. But in this particular situation where I was talking about just increasing the length, I think you would not touch this front section here unless you felt that it was also needing some extra length in there to cover more of the belly. But I wouldn't touch that. And if you do this cut right at that point, you wouldn't affect this side of the pattern because those two line up with each other. But where that joint starts, or where that connection is, doesn't affect the front. Hopefully that makes sense. So I would cut this off right at that point there. I would add a little bit more length to it to cover more of the back. And then I would pull the sewing machine out and start trying to sew it. What I always suggest, just a little bit of a trick, before you get to that point of sewing it all together, is I would tape this together. I think I just put my tape away. Now we know from the measurements that we've already done that this coat is not going to fit this little stuffed dog, but I just want to show you what I mean when I say taping the pattern together, and then I just want to test it out on the dog to see how it fits. So I'm just going to roughly tape this together and then put it on the dog and just test it out. So I'm going to tape the last bit once I get it onto my dog. We know this coat is way too big for the dog. I'm trying to see if I've got another stuffed dog I wonder if I think I've got one more here, but he's quite big, so I don't think I've got a dog. This guy's enormous, but it might be a little better just to kind of show you how I would try it on the dog. So one would assume that when I got to this point where I've created my paper pattern and I've measured it out and I've done the customization, one would assume it would be closer to my actual dog. But what I would do is I would print two sides of this. So I've got the full dog coat. So then I would tape this one to this side as well. And so then I have the full dog coat in paper. And then I would just put it on the dog. And I wouldn't tape it all together until I get it onto the dog. I would tape that double of this. I would tape it along the back so I've got two sides. And then I'd just drape it on the dog as best as I can. And again, this one's not going to fit, so let's go back to the small one. I would put it onto the dog, and then I would try that around the arms. I would put this together now, and I would tape that on to the dog. And then I would just start to assess the fit. So I would look at this armhole. Is this too tight? If I can't tape this together on my dog, then I know it's too tight in here. Is it too loose? Where does this neck to withers position sit on the dog? Now this is about the only part that actually did fit the dog, was the neck to withers was right on that dog. It was in the right, that's the right length for this particular stuffed dog. But this may be different for you. So if that neck to withers was sitting way back here, then that would explain why you've got that big gap that I showed you in those photographs. Or if it was super, super short and pulling up, that would explain why we had some other issues where we've got, you know, we would be pulling too far in or pulling too tight in behind here, and we've got a big gap here. The photographs that I showed you was the opposite. It was like down here because the withers position, the withers length was too short on the dog. So if what was happening is it was too tight in the front and we had the gap in behind. So these are the areas that you can really start to just kind of suss out at the paper level. You're not sewing it together yet. You're not wasting fabric. You're not tearing things out. You're not throwing out a coat afterwards that you spent hours and hours making. So again, you can look at this and you can look at how does it fit on my dog? Is it long enough? Is it going all the way down to where I want it to on the dog? Obviously, this coat's way too long for this stuffed animal, but that would give you an idea here, just at the paper level. And then if you're working with something that's really, really nice fabric, the next stage I would do, if you have the patience, is to just do it in some really rough, like a muslin they call it. It's just really rough fabric, throwaway fabric that you don't care about. Or maybe even do it out of an old shirt of yours or something that's similar in weight to the fabric that you're actually going to sew it in. Ultimately, you could do that. Make a really rough version. Don't bother finishing any seams or doing anything fancy. Don't bother lining it. Just simply throw it together based on the shape of your pattern, and then try it on your dog at that stage and see how it fits. So hopefully that will give you an idea. Let me just get back to me. Come on. Face cam. There we go. Okay, I'm back. Hopefully that'll give you an idea of where you can alter, how you can look at the measurements of a dog and then look at the measurements on the pattern and how you would customize those in order to fit your dog's shape and customize it so that it's comfortable on the dog. I mean, that is the key. You don't want your dog to be uncomfortable where things are too tight in the chest or big hole gaping in the back of the neck where they're not getting covered. So when you're outside in the rain, let's say, they're getting wet back there. So, you know, the comfort of the dog is always first and foremost in my mind. And then these kind of customizations, they're really simple usually. But by doing that customization, you're making the dog coat fit that dog perfectly. And that means the dog's going to be more comfortable, more interested in wearing the dog wear that you're making for it. And you're going to feel really, really proud when you finish something that is just custom fit for your dog. So I think I'll wrap up there. If there are any questions at all, by all means, please do feel free to put the questions down below in the comments down below, and I always love to answer them. If any of you have any photos like this that you've made some clothes and things aren't working and you need some help, you want to troubleshoot, let me know. and I'd be happy to just answer those questions for you. You can send me an email. I've always put my email down in the description down below. So if you don't want to just comment on the video itself, you can send me a direct email and I will respond to that. And if you have any photos that you can send me, you could send those along as well. So I'll just leave it at that. Again, I will put the link to the custom fit toolkit, which is available, and that really does allow you to start to work through the real hands-on, how do I troubleshoot the pattern to fit the measurements of my dog, and working through that flow chart, and how do you kind of dial it in so that it works down to the problem area that you're experiencing when you look at that dog coat. And how do you fix that at the pattern level and also at the measurement level? So take a look down below if you're interested in that custom fit toolkit. It will help you walk through and troubleshoot all those different things. Plus it comes with 3 separate kind of patterns. So you get the basic wrap dog coat, a panel style dog coat like we've been talking about here, and then also a t-shirt or like a sleeved version, not a t-shirt, but a coat for a dog that has sleeves, which is even a more customized, or has more levels to customization to put into that when you start customizing the pattern. So all of that will be down below in the description, and I'll leave it at that for this week. If you have any questions, you know what to do. Put questions in the comments and I will be happy to answer those for you. And in the meantime, have great fun sewing for your dog. We'll see you next week. I'm back at Thursday, 11 a.m. Pacific time, and we'll see you here live. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up and do follow me if you're interested in the content that I'm making. Thanks so much. Have a great week. Bye-bye.